My first book review of 2022 is Jade City by Fonda Lee. This has been a book that I've been looking forward to for a very long time, and I'm really excited to get into the review so that I can get back to reading the sequel. So first of all, I did enjoy this book. I like the world that Fonda Lee is building here, obviously because I am continuing on with the series, but I did have a couple of complaints, so I will be getting into those as well here. This is a spoiler-free review, so I'm just going to give a pretty general overview of it and then get into a couple of things that I liked and some things that I didn't like, and then finally give my overall score. Jade City is an urban fantasy novel. It's kind of hard to tell exactly what era it takes place in. I think roughly 50s or 60s maybe. It's never really clarified, which is perfectly fine. The general atmosphere and everything just kind of feels like it's around that era. It takes place in this large city that is essentially ruled by two warring clans. Both of these clans have agreements with the local government, as you tend to do when you are a very large gang that has a lot of power, just to keep things calm and to prevent the streets from being just filled with bodies and rubble. Those two clans are No Peak and the Mountain Clan. The story is told from the multiple viewpoints of the family members who run No Peak Clan. And I would argue that this story of Jade City is a lot more about the family members and their relationships with one another than it is about the conflict between the two clans or even Jade, which is the source of the magic in this world. This book, and I don't know if this is true for the entire series, but it is true for this book, it really focuses a lot on family drama and character development and also world building than really anything else in the story. We don't even get a ton of different action sequences, and even Jade itself is rarely used, which is okay because the characters were interesting and very well developed. I enjoyed following them and being inside their heads and seeing the way they acted, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. Let's talk about the magic system in Jade City. The core fantasy element of Jade City, and what really makes this a fantasy story, is jade. It is a unique mineral that is used to amplify the abilities of its users. Now, some individuals who come into contact with jade suffer horrible side effects, and others just go completely insane. There are all sorts of downsides to using jade if you are not somebody who is genetically predisposed to be able to come into contact with it. That was a weird sentence. What I'm essentially saying is that there are some people who are genetically capable of using jade without these side effects, while many others, and from the sounds of it, most people don't have the ability to touch jade and interact with it without experiencing severe side effects that can lead to madness and even death. Jade was really cool, and I really liked some of the concepts that were introduced with jade, but I felt like it wasn't explored all that well inside this book, which is understandable because this is a lot more about the family drama than it is about anything else. And jade also still played a crucial part in the story because it is sort of a drug that is being used and trafficked by these individuals, and there are all sorts of limitations and rules around its use and passing it between people. It is being smuggled in different places along with another drug. So there are all sorts of interesting things that happen because of jade, and is definitely part of the heart of this story and where the entire story really comes from and branches out from. But jade itself and the magical abilities that it grants to people wasn't really explored all that much, and we didn't get to see it used very often other than passively when people were using it to do things like amplify their perception, or they reference what jade was doing for them at that exact moment. There are a couple of combat scenes, but ultimately I just felt like jade was kind of underexplored in terms of the bonuses that you get from using it as opposed to the negative effects, which is a perfectly acceptable approach for the first entry in this series. I, for one, just would have really liked to see a little more of a fantastical element to it and see more of the usage of jade within this story. And I imagine we'll probably get that later on, but it is one minor complaint that I had, and it really just comes down to personal preference. I think I'm mainly disappointed in this because I came into this book knowing that Fonda Lee is a martial artist, so I was kind of hoping to see some really cool combat sequences that used jade to the advantage of the combatants, and there were some combat sequences, and they were pretty good. Not my favorite, but they were pretty good.
Not my usual, but nice.
Yet they always seemed pretty short and not all that detailed. Some of them were more detailed than others, but for the most part, it always felt a little bit underwhelming. Like I wanted to see more and wanted more details on how jade was being used to amplify these combat sequences. So the lack of jade's usage in this story is one main complaint that I have about Jade City, but given that the title of the next book is Jade War, I have a feeling that we're probably going to get a little more uses of jade and probably some cooler combat sequences than we got in Jade City. So with all of the fantastical elements really kind of taking a back burner to the family drama, we have to focus on the characters. They're supposed to be the main component of the story. They are really what we're following and paying attention to. So how were the characters? What were they written like? And did I enjoy them? Did they feel real? And I would say probably the best written characters that I've read in a while. And that was less because they were super well written and more because Fonda Lee really executes the multiple viewpoints to her advantage in this story. We get to see how each of these characters interact with one another and how each of the other characters view them, which adds multiple dimensions to all of them. If we were following just one viewpoint, we would only see how one individual perceives one character. But the truth is that one individual, especially somebody who is leading a massive massive criminal organization is going to behave very differently around different people. He's going to act differently around his brother and around his henchmen, around his lover. All of these people are going to get different sides of him until you finally get a well-rounded person. And by showing us multiple perspectives, both this individual's perspective and the perspectives of other people around this person, we get to see a lot more about them. Now multiply that by several times and we get several really well-rounded individuals who all interact with multiple different characters. We see them from numerous viewpoints, and this all culminates to characters who feel very lifelike and are a lot of fun to read on the page. You're always excited for the next interaction between two different characters, and you can't wait to see how two characters are going to interact with one another once they finally meet or cross paths. It's really exciting to see these characters talk and just experience the dialogue and be inside their heads to see how they feel about these other individuals. If this person doesn't trust this other person, maybe I shouldn't trust them either, and yet at the same time I do trust this individual when I'm inside his head. So ultimately the characters in this book really strong, very well written. The dynamics between them and their relationships were excellent. Now Fonda Lee's writing. Fonda Lee's writing has some great strengths and some weaknesses, although I will say that the weaknesses really boil down to personal preference. And the main weakness that I wanted to point out is that sometimes it seems like there's a bit of a tangent that breaks the flow of the writing otherwise. It's almost like something that should have been like a footnote of some sort, or maybe something I would have read in a wiki article about a character that I didn't really even need to know. And a lot of it is information that ends up being kind of unnecessary for the story. I understand that some of it is world building, and that's okay. I myself just felt like the world was being built repeatedly, which if you feel like you need to reinforce those ideas as a writer, that's perfectly fine. And some readers really want and need those reinforcements, or they like that extra world building and the extra bit of flavor that's added in. But for me, it was often distracting and kind of came out of left field. If in the middle of a conversation, there's suddenly a paragraph about world building and some history, it's gonna kind of take me out of the moment. I would have liked for some of those to be handled differently, or in some cases, just not having been given the information at all. There are a few instances when a scene was just interrupted and we were given information that didn't seem all that relevant at the time, and then by the time I got to the end of the book, I realized, oh, it just wasn't relevant at all in this story. Which, to each their own, this is really going to be a personal preference thing. If you are someone who enjoys a lot of world building and a lot of background information, even if it's not ultimately going to be super relevant to the story by the end of it, then you may actually really enjoy these features and the interruptions of these scenes. Judging by how well loved these books are, there are probably a lot of people who appreciate this extra world building and the extra bit of flavor that it adds to the story. For me, it just felt like stuff that I probably could have skipped or that should have just been removed from the novel entirely. Now, there are other really strong suits to her writing, especially when it comes to dialogue and the interaction between the people, which I already talked about in the characters. So there are some really great writing moments in here, and I definitely can't wait to read her writing in the next book. Her writing certainly kept me flowing through the story and was very easy to read, extremely approachable, probably one of the most approachable books that I've read in a while. I would say that if you're somebody who hasn't read a whole lot recently and you want to start reading a fantasy book and you're okay with a light fantasy, her writing is very approachable, kind of Sanderson-esque. I would say that Jade City is a really good one to pick up. Now let's get to what you're all here for, my overall rating for Jade City. But before we do that, I did want to let you know that you can like and subscribe for free, which both really help me out as I try to grow this channel. Assuming that you're watching this right when it came out, you can probably tell I am pretty new here and very fresh, so whatever support you can give me is definitely appreciated. And now on to my overall score for Jade City. I kind of wrestled with how I was going to rate this one because I want to be fair and honest here. I did really enjoy the book, but there were also some pitfalls and some expectations that just weren't met. And I also felt like a lot of the elements that I enjoy in a book kind of took a back burner. So while technically this book is a really well-written book and has a cool story that it is setting up, it really did, to me, just feel like a lot of setup with very minimal payoff. There were a couple of cool scenes in here, but by the end of it, I really just wanted to move on to book 2 so that I could actually get some payoff for some of the things that were set up in book 1. And really what I'm talking about there when I mentioned the payoff that I wanted is the usage of Jade. I just felt like it was very lacking in this book, and I'm really excited to see how it's used in the upcoming books. Hopefully, we see a lot more usage of it in Jade War and Jade Legacy than we do in this book, especially for something that is so valuable and offers so much power and is at the center of this entire story. It would be really useful for me to get an idea of just how powerful Jade is and what all it is capable of. And yeah, there were some moments in here that showed just how incredibly powerful Jade could be. I just think that Jade City could have used a few more moments that really showed just what Jade is capable of and shows us some really cool uses of them beyond just a couple of instances of people maybe pushing their energy into someone else or things along those lines. They were cool scenes and they definitely showed me that Jade is powerful and very dangerous, but there are other things that are suggested that Jade can do, and I just didn't get a lot of cool sequences with that. And I would definitely like to see more Jade enhanced combat in the next books. So I'm really hoping that I get to that. And all around, this kind of culminates in a pretty average experience for me with Jade City. It was good. I enjoyed it and I can't wait for the next book, but it just didn't really blow me away and didn't quite meet the expectations that I had for the book. So I'm going to end up giving Jade City 3 stars, but I believe that the upcoming books are probably going to do a lot better than that. Now, 3 stars is not bad. If it was bad, then I would not continue to read it, but it does mean that there are just some things that I felt were lacking in this book, and I'm really excited to get to the next one so I can see if it kind of makes up for some of the flaws that I found in book 1 of this series. So 3 stars to Jade City, an average rating for a story that is really setting up something a lot bigger and that I am a lot more excited about than I am about this particular book. And there you have it, my review for Fonda Lee's Jade City. I did enjoy this book, but I am more excited to get into Jade War and see what happens next. In fact, I'm so eager to get to that I'm just gonna go ahead and end this video. If you would like to check out another video from me, you can click on this one up here. And until next time, bye.